Feel free to drop questions in the chat or unmute and ask questions. I like to keep a laid back environment, and so I don't want anybody to feel like they're going to miss something or miss out. Engagement is more important than curriculum, and so let's take this journey together. So if you would, to help me out, because I like to use real life examples, just drop in the chat at least your organization and your role and what you hope to learn today. That way I can make sure if there's anything that I need to tailor differently, I can do that.
Drop it off, or should I ask
With
for
whom?
one at the area?
If you could mute yourself, that would be really helpful. Just make sure you're on mute. I'll try and do it my side too. All right. So yeah, if you could just drop in the chat your role and what you're hoping to learn today, and even your organization, that would be extremely helpful too. So I am Nisi, and I am the founder and owner of AJB Consulting. And we actually do a hodgepodge of things, as most consultants do. My background is I'm a public health nurse, and I started to work on the not patient side or patient care side of healthcare, which led me to work in nonprofit spaces. My background is heavy in project management and Lean Six Sigma. And if you've been in the nonprofit world, you realize it's a completely different world than anything else that's happening. And so I have just been able to really be in some really great situations and opportunities to learn from majestic leaders. And I have taken and collected everything that I've learned. And my goal is to really help share my knowledge with as many nonprofit leaders as possible. So when we're thinking about a strategic plan, one of the first things that I always tell people is that you've got to understand what it really means to the different people in your organization. For some of us, especially those that are sitting in the visionary seats, right? So that's probably leadership or board members. A lot of the work and the thinking that we do kind of sits in the cloud, in that esoteric space. And we are a little bit detached from the boots on ground space. This would be your frontline managers, your program managers, the people that are doing the everyday problem solving. And it's really important as you are creating your strategic plan that, one, you have balance between the esoteric stuff, the visionary stuff, and two, you understand the bandwidth and resources of the people on ground, boots on ground. A lot of times organizations will create strategic plans and they won't bring in the people that are actually doing the work, where the metrics are tied to. So I always encourage, don't just think about your stakeholders, think about the people that are at the front door. Think about the people that, the first person that your customer sees, or the first person they hear on the phone call. A lot of times the things that you think are important, that's not what they're getting front hand. And so it's really important to make sure you engage as many people as possible in your strategic planning. I always say, engage everybody, have limited votes, right? Because you want to hear everybody's opinion. Diversity matters when we're talking not just race and ethnicity, but background and, service or performance. So always keep that in mind when you are creating your strategic plan or planning for it. Some of the things that we do will complement your vision, and some of the things that we do will provide a constraint. The challenge is for you to figure out what you can do to kind of tilt that from one side to the other. A lot of times what happens is we just, as visionaries, think this is a great idea, but we don't realize that it actually is a constraint for someone else. And so I'll give you an example. I know in a lot of service-based industries where you have clients or patients coming into your organization, there's a lot of idea around what could happen in a waiting room, right? We're trying to collect data, so now we want to put a survey, and the front desk person is going to be managing that process. Well, if the front desk person is already struggling with other areas to get people checked in, where there's actual value for that customer, having those types of obstacles can actually be harmful to a strategic plan. So the data you're trying to collect is not going to be what you really want, because they're not going to be able to have the bandwidth to do it. So keep that in mind as well. When we're thinking, so the first part of this will be that esoteric part, right? The concept and idea of strategic planning. And the second part of this session will be the tools and methodologies that you can use. So when you're thinking about, creating a plan, everybody needs to be going to the same place, right? A lot of times when we come in to help as a consultant, you have one team or group, their plan is to go one way, and another team or group, and their plan is to go in a completely different opposite direction. And it's really important that you guys are going the same place. Really define what your purpose is. So if your goal is to provide shelter for, 500 individuals, in what line, and how is that in alignment with what your mission is? How is it the things that you're doing tied to your strategic plan? And let me explain. So if we want to shelter 500 people, do we need to be concerned about coats or blankets? Or do we need to be concerned about the shelter, the infrastructure, and someone else is concerned about coats or blankets? I can't see who it is. Let me just see. There we go. I think that did it. Also, be specific in what your objectives are. And we're going to talk about the difference between goals and objectives, because I think a lot of times people get those mixed up just a little bit. Also, if you have future plans to not provide shelter in the next 5 years, how much energy are we putting into it now and why? Be really clear on what your actionable steps are and how you're going to achieve them. And more importantly, who's going to do those, take those steps? Who's going to do that work? When we talk about goal alignment, we are not just talking about like the goal on a piece of paper. We are talking about culture. Is everyone on your team dedicated to doing the same work or to get to the same space? What most organizations miss is there's a culture component to this. You have to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. You want to make sure that everybody wants to collaborate. If there's issues in between different departments or different programs, you're going to have to work those out first in order to have a successful strategic plan. And you want to take the time and invest in that. It will only be beneficial to your organization. So sometimes when I come in to do an assessment before strategic planning, one of the things I'm looking at is the culture. And the culture, not just in one program or one department, but all inclusive. And if there's not a great collaborative culture, we spend time on building that first, because in order for us to work together towards the same mission, we have to want to be together to work for that same mission. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of excuses, you'll get a lot of roadblocks. So it's worth the investment to make sure you have a culture of collaboration. Let's see. There we go. And then how are you communicating? How are you communicating your goals? And who are you communicating those goals to? Make sure you involve everyone, not just leadership, not just your board, but your staff, your volunteers, and your donors as well. You want to remove any guessing as to what it is that you're doing or what you're focused on. The clearer you are, the easier it is to see where you're trying to go. Sometimes the communication needs to be simplified. Sometimes we want to give reports or we want to give status updates, but we muddy the waters so much that people are just kind of confused, I'm not really even sure what it is that they do. Can anyone on your staff, anyone that volunteers, anyone on your board, or any of your donors at any point say, my organization is committed to this, and these are the things that we're doing to get to it? And if they can't, You need to sit down with your communications team and establish that. It's really important that everybody is speaking the same language, because your staff, your volunteers, your board members, and your donors, they're your advocates. They're the ones that are going to help spread and build your brand and your mission. So we talked about fostering that collaboration, and one space that I want you guys to think about is diversity. And I know a lot of people think straight to race and ethnicity, but I'm talking about skill set as well as perspective. I'm also talking about the different roles that are at work in your organization, understanding what they do and how they do it, and bringing them to the table to pour knowledge into the rest of the team is extremely important. Don't miss the opportunity to start fostering collaboration as soon as possible, before you even start talking about being strategic. So when we talk about, that goal-oriented culture, don't forget your support teams like finance and maintenance, because they need to feel like they have purpose too. They need to see that what they do has impact as well. And it's up to the leadership or the board to really help them see that. We're all working to the same, destination. But if finance isn't really motivated, if they don't feel like what they're doing has impact, you're not going to get the best out of them. And because of that, you're not going to get the best out of your strategic plan or the work that you guys are going to have to do to make it successful. I love resource optimization. I am a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. And so resource optimization really means we're not going to waste anything, time or talent or efforts or activity or energy, right? We really want to pay attention to how we allocate resources. Here's where nonprofits don't do such a great job, just by default, I think, and also by culture. We have someone that is maybe the CEO, but they're also wearing the hat of donor development, and they're also wearing the hat of HR. It's just not very feasible to be able to do a lot of work or to move the needle if you're wearing all the hats. You're going to need resources, or you're going to need to figure out how to optimize your resources. So that might mean going from 7 goals to 3, because you have the bandwidth or the resources to manage 3 goals successfully in the first year and add the 4 additional goals for the next year. Since the pandemic, I really find it challenging to plan outside of 2 years for nonprofit organizations. We always leave a little bit of space for what we call innovation, but the reality is 2 years is like a lifetime, especially since we've all experienced the pandemic, and we need to be able to pivot quickly. Having a hard 5-year plan can actually be suffocating to a nonprofit organization. Having space for innovation, and in that innovation space will sit some 3 and 5-year ideas or concepts, that's appropriate. You also want to look at how you do your decision making. This is extremely important. Is one person just making the decision? Is one person talking to a team of subject matter experts and they're still the only one that's making that decision? Do you have your subject matter experts in positions of authority to tell you something is or isn't working? And then how do you tackle those challenges or those obstacles? Because you're not going to be able to, succeed in a strategic plan if one person is making all the decisions and it's one person's perspective. I love to use the Eisenhower matrix when it comes to decision making, especially for a strategic plan. Typically what happens is this: you guys get together, you decide these are your goals and your objectives, and everything needs to be done all at once because you don't have a sense of priority, or you don't have a sense of urgency, but most importantly, you don't have a sense of that's not appropriate right now. And so when you use the Eisenhower matrix, you're going to put those goals that you have into one of these 4 boxes. So the first box, top left, is important and urgent. This is in your quadrant 1. This deals with the things that you need to take care of immediately. You need to fix something, something is gushing or bleeding, like you have to take care of it as soon as possible. Then you have quadrant 2. These are the things that are important but not urgent. These are the things that a majority of your strategic planning goals and objectives will sit in, because it requires somebody to maintain it. It requires time and energy and effort. However, be careful in that planning process. A lot of times people will put, probably 50% of the work in the first 3 months of a strategic plan. And then people are so burnt out that they don't want to finish. They don't want to see it through. So planning is really important for the things that sit in quadrant 2. And then you have not important, but urgent. These are the things that need to be delegated. These are also the things that would be great if maybe you didn't have the people sources, but you had the financial source to hire a consultant, hire a contractor, get a subject matter expert in there. If all of your bylaws need to be updated and changed, and your organization just doesn't have that subject matter expert, or your board doesn't have it, hire a lawyer to come in. Let them do that. Don't use the time of everyone else to try and figure it out. Let the lawyer do that, right? And then you have the fourth quadrant, which is not important, not urgent. This is usually the stuff that you probably can let it go. It might have been a lot of nonprofits, they start off with one mission, one initiative or goals, and they just kind of keep it just because. But what happens is after, a few years or a few rounds of project planning, they don't really use it. And it might not be that you need to add something to your strategic plan. It might be that the plan is to remove something, remove a program, remove a service, and what that looks like. Because then you can do the first and second quadrant, much better, because you have better resources aligned to it. This is one of the tools that I use because it's simple. Simplicity works when you're planning. And so we literally will put on the wall, I'm old school, sticky notes and everything. And we will figure out all the things that they say that they want to do in their strategic plan. And then we will place them in one of these quadrants. And you guys will get a Word doc of this, so you guys can use it in your planning sessions as well. One of the most important parts of strategic planning is really understanding who's in the room, who's going to be doing the work, who's going to be making the decisions. So for me, whenever I do strategic planning, it's important that I have a conversation with every stakeholder. Whether it's board member, leadership, frontline employee, whoever is going to be participating in the decision making or adding to the knowledge of a strategic plan. So know your people and assign them accordingly. We all have that one, devil's advocate. Nothing is right, everything is wrong. They fit well in sustainability, because they're going to help you identify the potential risk, right? So I always say, if you complain, then you volunteer. This is your complainer, quote unquote, in your board or in your leadership. They should be the ones that are dedicating their time to looking for potential risk and developing those mitigation strategies. I know you know who this person is as I start talking about it, right? And then you also want to assign your naysayer. The beauty of having a diverse group of people that don't see things the same way is it gives you the opportunity to catch stuff before it gets out, right? Have you ever seen a social media post that just should not have been posted and thought to yourself, well, somebody didn't do their job, because that should have never gotten out in the first place? That's what your devil's advocate and your naysayer is going to do. They're going to anticipate the things that other people are going to say. You might find your naysayer saying things like, well, I just don't think that looks good. I'm concerned about, our reputation as a nonprofit if we do this task or activity. Those people matter too. Their perspective is just as valuable as the visionary that's optimistic. You just have to know who your people are and know how to utilize them. So when most people think stakeholder engagement, they think 100% board giving, or they think, I want to make sure, people know what we're doing and are happy to work with us. But when I think stakeholder engagement, I think literally engagement. Think about how that couple feels in that space, right? Freshly engaged couple. They are head over heels. They are consumed by the moment. They are excited. They are sharing. They are advocates for each other. They are in, planning mode. They're optimistic. They're ready to tackle whatever comes, against them, and they're ready to embrace whatever comes for them. This is the opportunity to not just communicate what your plan is, but to build that trust, build those relationships before you start your strategic planning, right? Because we're talking about that esoteric space, right? That visionary space. Build the opportunity for communication from your frontline staff to your C-suite or your leadership team. Do they feel like their voice matters? When you walk into the space, are they excited to work with you? Are they excited to share their challenges and celebrations? What does that look like in your organization? The more engaged your stakeholders are, and remember, our stakeholders are not just board and leadership. There are volunteers, there are staff, there are donors, because they are our advocates. If they are committed to the engagement, then you are going to have a much more successful strategic plan. If they are not, what will happen is you will see over and over again, things just kind of fall off and die because nobody wants to put the extra energy into it. Because let's be honest, a strategic plan is extra work on top of what somebody is already doing. I always say have at least one really big goal. Have one feel good, we did this together as a team goal. Even for organizations that feel like they're in that crisis space, because the work and the energy looks different on those big goals, those ambitious goals, than it does on those crisis goals. Make sure that everybody is in alignment, and make sure that when you're talking about strategic planning or program management or oversight or accountability, you're talking about it in a positive way. You're talking about it in a way that it will impact the community that you serve. If the work that you're doing or the work that you're setting up in your strategic plan doesn't provide impact, why are you doing it? If it doesn't provide impact, why are you doing it? So let's talk about some of the many, many tools that you can use when it comes to starting and finishing a strategic plan. The first one is an ecosystem tool. This is important because most people only know what gets done in their bubble, right? So when I do strategic planning sessions, part of that day, we do an ecosystem, internal and external ecosystem. This is who you're partnered with internally, who you're partnered with externally, what collaborations you have with other organizations or within your community. What restraints do you have with governance or coding? What does it look like, as a brand awareness? So your marketing. Who are you marketing to? Who's your audience? Who are your beneficiaries? And what we do is we kind of put all of that into one place. And I promise you, it has not failed. Most of the time, the board knows maybe 5% of what's happening or what the ecosystem of a nonprofit looks like. And then your frontline staff, they just know their program and what that looks like. And then your HR team, they just, right, like you get the drift. So nobody knows what everybody is doing. So here's some benefits to an internal ecosystem, understanding it. You can see right away your strengths and weaknesses. You can see, okay, we don't have the ability to do XYZ goal because we don't have the resources in that space. So maybe the goal this year is to build the resource, and next year we can put this goal back up because we'll have the resources in place. But if we don't know that, if we don't allow everybody to provide their valuable input, we won't know what's missing or what we're capable of internally. It's also important to understand your external, okay? Because now you're looking at different opportunities and threats. What could go wrong? As nonprofit organizations, we are often in a chokehold when it comes to funding, right? Every legislative year, we're like, okay, let's pray that we still get funding, or we're begging for, funds to still come through. If you're not aware of the different streams of revenue or funding for your organization, or the timing or the resources that it takes, right? Are you spending 40% of your time on grants and you're only getting about 20% of your budget from grants? You have to understand what this looks like. Everybody needs to be able to see what your ecosystem is. It also helps you set realistic goals and objectives. If I want to increase the number of clients that we see by 25%, I can tell right away, based off of the resource I have in that program, of people or of staffing that will be able to realistically manage 25% increase. What you don't want is to create another bottleneck. So you create a goal and objective, but because you don't have the resource or the bandwidth, you create another bottleneck. The other reason it's important to understand your ecosystem is because you want to make informed decisions. You want to know what your stakeholders really think. Because if your stakeholders are out at networking events or social events or community outreach events, and they're not really feeling what it is that's happening, they're not going to be the advocate that you want them to be. And when you're trying to figure out, well, why haven't we gotten, as many intakes that we used to get from our outreach events? It might be because your stakeholders really don't know what's happening or how things work. Also, understand the gaps between your stakeholders or your leadership and your frontline experience. Most don't understand the opposite. Everyone has an idea of what somebody should be doing, but until you explain it to them, they often will feel in the dark. So this is a lot, and I usually don't like to put a lot of words on here, but you guys are going to get this slide, and so I wanted you to have all the information as well. These are some of the areas of focus that you would include when you're gathering information about your ecosystem. So any type of governance or leadership, all of your programs and services, and how they work, right? What are your fundraising and resource development or your donor development space? What does that look like? Where's your funding coming from? How are you being sustainable? Is 20% coming from partners or corporate partnership and 60% coming from grant writing? How much time are you spending, cultivating? Are you missing a donor development person? When you think about your stakeholder engagement, are you engaged with your beneficiaries? Does your leadership staff look like your beneficiaries? Are you trying to expand to a wider audience? Are you sitting in one zip code? And then what about your public relations? What's the messaging that's going out about your organization? What is the brand awareness that people have about what you do and how you do it? And then you also want to keep in mind like collaboration and partnerships. When you have a nonprofit, chances are you have at least 10 other organizations that you're collaborating with. When you create an ecosystem, all of those organizations should be listed and the mechanism or tool in which you guys work together. And then what about your financial management? Do you have somebody internally doing that work? Is it contracted out? How is your budgeting? How many days cash on hand do you have? All of these things sit in your ecosystem. And just as a visual, I kind of removed some of the information. Not that you'd be able to see it because it's so small, but these are some visuals of what it looks like when we build out an ecosystem. So in the center, you would have the organization's name. And then as you go into the different spokes, you have the different types of work being done based on that organization's area of focus. But you guys will get the slide, and so you guys will get the list. So I just want to stress, I mean, I can't stress enough the importance of evaluating your culture for collaboration and to be goal-oriented, and creating the ecosystem before you start working on a strategic plan. So when you do a strategic plan, I always see it in the form of like a hierarchy graph, right? So at the top sits your goals. These are those high level things that you want your organization to achieve. And then next is your objectives. These are a little bit more specific. They have more targets attached to them and they're measurable, but these sit under your objectives. So you have your objective, which is high level. And then within that, I'm sorry, your goal, which is high level. And then in that you have objectives. And in your objectives, you can have 3 objectives for one goal. And then for each of your objectives, you should have a process to make it happen. So I'll give a little bit of an example. If our one goal is brand awareness, right? That's the big thing. And then the objective is to increase reach and engagement on 3 social media platforms, create a YouTube channel, and provide, 3 videos a month. And then maybe the last one is to host or attend, let's say 12 community outreach programs. For each of those objectives, you should have a process. So if we took the process for the community outreach programs, there should be something that says along the lines, assign research to name the person or the job description, to find community outreach events to attend, looking for 6 out of 12, right? Filter with these standards: must be indoors, must be in our zip code, must provide table, must not cost more than $200, right? Like that's when you're talking about your process. And then your tactics are if there's anything deeper than your process. Occasionally you don't have both, but you should really try because it helps the person that's responsible for it to do it. And it also helps anyone that's looking at your dashboard to see what happened, right? And then you have metrics. So if we continue with that community outreach events, 12 community outreach events in a year, at the end of your year, you should have 12 out of 12. And if you don't, you can walk back from your tactics to your process to figure out what happened that we didn't have that. We didn't have it because all of the community outreach events that we were able to find, the table was more than $500, right? Because in your process, you said $200 or less. So all of these steps are extremely important. It seems tedious when you're in the weeds, but the value of creating goals, objectives, process, tactics, and metrics is so important when you're laying out your strategic plan for your organization. The next part of your strategic plan, once you have your goals to your metrics, is project management. This is where most strategic plans go to die. They go to die because they don't have the right style or the right methodology for their project management. So let's talk about some of those. Again, sorry for all the words, but you guys are going to get this, and I didn't want you to have to print out, 7 or 8 slides. So when we think about common project management styles, one style is the autocratic style. And this is really that top-down approach. This is where I see a lot of nonprofits go. The project manager, who is also usually whoever is in that leadership role, they kind of do it all. And that's just not feasible. They might not do the actual work, but they kind of make all the decisions on the work that should be done. And they often don't engage the people that's actually doing the work. And then you have that democratic project management style. And this is actually the opposite. This is where everybody is at the table and everybody is heard. And then you make a team, or you make a decision as a team. I like this because it provides buy-in. If you're going to be tasked with helping us reach a goal, your input should be part of that. And when you have this type of management style, it's extremely helpful. And then you have your laissez-faire project management style. And this is kind of, a hands-off approach where the project manager or the leader just kind of delegates the authority to everybody get everything done. Here's the thing about this. When you're working in spaces where your subject matter experts are unique, and as the CEO or leader or project manager, you don't have the skill set in what it is that they're doing, you kind of have to let them do it and just get updates, right? But this is usually one that doesn't require a whole lot of time sensitivity as well. You see this one sometimes when we're talking about products more than services. And then you, of course, have your hybrid approach. And this is just kind of a mix where you get everybody's input, but you need to get things done quickly. So some of the decision making is the project manager or whoever is leading that project. And finally, you have one that's kind of like the laissez-faire, but what happens is it just depends on what's happening or what's required. You usually have project manager experts that are experts in whatever it is that you're doing, right? So I do a lot of, healthcare nonprofit work. But if I didn't have that nonprofit, skill set or specialty, I might not be the appropriate project manager to come in, because you've got to do a lot of educating me about nonprofit world and the do's and the don'ts and kind of how those systems work. Okay. And now let's talk about project management methodologies. First, you have waterfall. This is the one that I think most nonprofits feel like they should be doing. Really, it just means your water falls into one bucket and you don't move on to the next thing until that bucket is filled, and then you tip it over into the next bucket. This is a linear approach. The problem with that is it can often go stagnant because if you have 5 or 6 goals or objectives, you're on hold until objective 1 gets completed. And so it's really important. This works well if you have maybe 1 or 2 goals, you have a small team. There's not going to be a whole lot of pivoting or changes. You're not relying on highly skilled subject matter experts, and you're really looking for a methodology to plan out a whole year with 1 or 2 goals. So for example, depending on the size of your nonprofit, your goal might be to just establish a donor development officer position and plan, right? Because you feel like if you can get those 2 things done, then it will change the dynamics of your nonprofit. And so a waterfall strategy or methodology might work for you. We also have agile methodology, and this is when we need collaboration across different teams. It's also when there's a lot of moving parts. This is really important when there's cultures that are like trying to move forward or moving in innovation. So if you're starting new projects or programs or new initiatives as part of your strategic plan, this one works well for you. This one says we don't have to wait for one component to be completely finished before we start working on other areas of our strategic plan. And then you have the Scrum methodology. So Scrum just really means like sprint, right? It means short stuff. A lot of times, if I am working with a traditional kind of old school nonprofit that wants to use that waterfall methodology, I will introduce some Scrum or some sprints into their work just to kind of help move it along or get little micro projects completed along the way to make sure that we don't get that stagnant feel that we talked about in waterfall. This requires people to be, really flexible with really quick turnarounds. This does not work if you don't have the bandwidth for your people to be moved out of their regular workplace, right? Out of the regular work that they're already responsible for, because it requires their time away from that. And it's pretty intense for about 2 weeks. So this requires planning to make sure that bandwidth and resources are managed properly. Kanban is one of my favorites because it's simple and it's visual. It just is a billboard. This is what most people work from or start from when they're doing any type of work, when you're doing your to-do list, when you're trying to figure out if projects are done. Most people have some sort of Kanban methodology that they're using. It is just a simplified way to figure out what's in queue, what we're working on right now, and what we've already finished. Clearly, you can go in more detail, but however, it's really just that simple, and it's usually very visually pleasing. And then you have your lean methodology. Basically, this just means to cut out waste. We do a lot of things to figure out where are you wasting time, where are you wasting money or resources, whatever that looks like for your organization, especially if your goal is attached to the experience of your client or your beneficiary. So one of the spaces that we use it in healthcare is waiting room. So most people do not like to wait in the waiting room for a doctor's office. So there's some reasoning behind that, right? We want to give about 15 minutes from the time you arrive until the time we do your blood pressure. That's one thing. But there's still usually a 30, 45-minute wait sometimes. So some of the things that some organizations have been doing is creating, digital check-ins. So they check in from their phone, an hour before they have to arrive, and they provide all the information that they were going to have to fill out the clipboard for from their last visit. Well, there's no value in that for that patient, right? And so lean looks at those spaces like, how can we remove the things that don't provide value for our customer? And then you have Six Sigma. Six Sigma is really about figuring out how we're going to continuously achieve these goals or continuously be sustainable. It's also about getting the right people in the right spaces for quality management. It's also about when you have a big goal and you have no idea how you're going to accomplish it, whether you're not sure about your resources or you're not sure about how big your metrics should be. Sometimes I get called in when there's grant writing because they're trying to figure out on a statistical level, should we say we can provide, 500 shelter nights, and based off of our current resources, and what would we need to do to up our resources or decrease our resources to get to those 500 nights. When there's kind of confusion about what the real problem is, most people turn to Six Sigma. All right. That was a lot. I moved fast because I want to give plenty of time if there's questions or if you need me to go back. But here's what you should screenshot, you should know. First thing you want to do is create your internal and external ecosystem. Be as detailed as you need to be for everyone on your team. This gives you a very visual, synopsis of what's happening in your organization, what the different programs are, how they work, how many people or resources you have for each, the connection between collaboration and competitors, where your funding is coming from, where your money is going to. And you want to engage all of your team members. It's really important that everybody gets their hands on this, right? Or gets to put their drop of water in the bucket for this ecosystem. Because if you leave out one person that you feel like their role or position was too minor, you're going to have a problem. I'll give you an example. A strategic plan that I had just worked on, they're in the process of getting new property. And one of their stakeholders that they invited to the strategic planning was the person that's in charge of their facilities. Facilities often isn't brought to the table, right? But they know a huge part of what they're about to do involves those compliance measures, right? ADA bathrooms, codes for the city, anything with real estate or grounds and things of that nature, safety, environmental safety. Having his input was extremely valuable because it actually provided us an opportunity to prepare for delays that we probably wouldn't have thought about had his knowledge not been in the room. I am not a fan of 4-hour strategic planning sessions. My preference is really that they're 2 days. And I know 2 days can be a lot for an organization, but there's a lot that goes in it. You're almost going to create the strategic plan potentially on day one. And then on day two, you're going to tear it apart. You're going to get your naysayers, your devil's advocates, the people that say that can't be done. And you're going to work through ways to mitigate any potential risk to your organization as it relates to your strategic plan. I would rather know that this could be a potential, bump in the road now than, 9 months into my strategic plan and $5,000 later, right? I also recommend that you have a consultant lead this. It's important for somebody to be Switzerland in the room. And if you are working for that organization, you are most likely going to be biased. And so you want to get somebody that is neutral to that space. Once you get this, your consultant should help you establish your goals, your objectives, process, tactics, and metrics. Take your time. Take your time really defining what it is that you want to do. I have a great friend who's a consultant, and she always says, if your mission is to save green dogs, are there green dogs that need to be saved, right? Sometimes we want to do the work because we're here, but we haven't taken the time to assess the environment to say the work that we're doing is of value. And then always use tools like Eisenhower Matrix. It's my favorite because it's really simple and easy to use. This way, you don't have 80% of your work in the first 3 months of your strategic plan, and then you are burnt out before you really get started. It gives you the opportunity to say, I need to get rid of this. This needs to come off the plate altogether, or this is something that we need to delegate to somebody else, a consultant or a contractor. Then figure out which project management style fits your culture. If you are in a 2 or 3 person group, you might just kind of automatically make those decisions. The larger your organization, the more you should take time to figure out which type or which style of project management is going to fit. This is important because when it's time for accountability, when it's time to figure out why something didn't work, your style will dictate how that happens, how it feels for everybody. And then determine which project management methodologies fit your strategic needs. So I prefer to use, well, almost all of them except for maybe waterfall, unless I am trying to, we're just doing one big lift, right? Sometimes, like one organization, theirs was they just needed transportation. So it was just one lift. That was that was all that was in their strategic plan, because transportation was a huge component of their organization. They're kind of like Meals on Wheels, but not the same organization. And so clearly transportation is extremely important. And that was the only thing that they wanted to focus on. So we were able to use waterfall in that situation because it was much easier when you just have one big goal that requires things to happen one before the other. I would love to chat with you. This QR code is to my calendar for a 15-minute chat. You can use it as many times as you want. I have certain times and days dedicated to answering questions. So if you can get an appointment, you can use it, and I'd be available completely free to just chat about maybe some of the spaces that you're in for your organization and what that looks like for you. And I want to make sure that you know there's no such thing as an easy strategic plan, and the ink is never dry. So just want to make sure that you don't try to, fix and solve all of your organization's problems, and don't try to create 5 and 7 year plans for everything. Keep it simple, be realistic, have, heartfelt goals. Make sure your culture says that we're all in this together, and then move forward. All right, so I think the next one is, I think it's just questions, right? Gotcha. Yes. All right, so I'll turn my camera back on. Feel free to unmute and ask questions, or put them in the chat. Got a few minutes left. Yes, Deborah. I see your hand.
Hi there.
Hello.
One of the questions that I have, if you're working with a real novice board for a startup and you've got the different methodologies, is it possible that you can use the project management tools, the Kanban, for example, get everybody visual on the board, understand their sticky notes is what they're interested in or what their focus is, and then work that into another methodology once you've established what some of the priorities are from that experience, and then go in to possibly an agile, because you want to have a portion completed and then work in our case as a seminary, we have different buckets that we're working in. Mm-hmm. We have recruiting, and we have the actual instructors, and we have the finance side, and we have the donor side. But within the methodology, could some just feed into others? But the strategic plan itself, don't we need to do some preliminaries before we get to that?
Yeah. So first, always remember, sometimes what happens is when it's time to create a strategic plan, we look at it like everything it needs to be a part of the strategic plan. If you're already doing something well, it does not need to be part of your strategic plan, right? If you are doing recruiting well, or it's not causing pain to your organization, it might not need to be part of your strategic plan. So usually what happens is, I'll speak to, look, I'm just thinking of the last one that I did. The way we did it was, I met with all of the board members and stakeholders. After I met with them, I learned about kind of their preference for communication, got some insight on, their thoughts about the organization and what is important to them to be on the strategic plan. Then we had what's called a lean coffee style planning session. Sometimes what happens when you do strategic planning is the 4 or 5 members of leadership, or the 4 or 5 board members, whoever, they decide what's important to the entire organization, right? When you do a lean coffee style, I'm using sticky note method also. When you do a lean coffee style, in that moment, after you've done the ecosystem, after you've seen all the work that's being done in the organization, then you determine what you feel is important to you. And we really just kind of tally mark those spaces that are important. So we might have said that, fine lining our budgeting system is important, recruiting is important, and brand awareness is important. And then we have a conversation. We talk about what that looks like. We talk about how much of a lift that is going to be for the organization if there's resources. And then we do a round 2 of that lean coffee style, planning, where people say, I thought branding awareness was important, but really, if we don't go ahead and take care of recruiting, we're not going to be able to do the brand awareness very well. And so they shift what's important to them. This is powerful because sometimes we write something down, we turn it in, and we kind of fix it and forget it. And then whoever is accepting that information, they just decide that's what's going to be the priorities. So use the lean coffee style to have a conversation, vote again on what's important to them, and then use that Eisenhower matrix. So you said, and this is where you can eliminate some of the goals, you said all of these things are important to you. How important to you? Is it important and urgent? Is it important and not urgent? And then you can determine, usually that 4th quadrant, people will let go of a lot of things because it's not a strategic initiative. It's just something that needs to be part of the work that's being done for the organization. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. So once you have all of that done, then the next thing is to say, okay, what style and methodologies are we going to use to get this work done? I almost always do Kanban because it's a very visual, high-level oversight kind of thing. It's a great way to report. It's easy to build a dashboard for. And then what I do is I determine how we're going to work through the project. So depending on the goal, might depend on what I need to do as far as the methodology. So if the goal is kind of straightforward, we need a new vision, mission, brand, right? That's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of we got to figure it out wrapped up in that, right? So I might use waterfall for that. If the goal is, let me think, creating a funding strategy. Well, if you don't know what % of your funds are coming from grants and what % of your funds are coming from individual donors, when there's kind of question or chaos around a goal, then I'll use Lean Six Sigma because it helps us eliminate the waste and it helps us do things that produce the highest return for our investment. So you can definitely mix them up. A good practitioner will use the right tool or combination of tool all the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Speak now, forever hold your peace. All right. Well, I will be sending this out today and it'll go on the website today. It'll be later this evening. I got a couple other training sessions. You will get the recording. You will also get the slides. You'll also get a PDF checklist and you will be able to use those tools as you see fit. You'll get the link to do a 15-minute chat with me just to kind of answer any questions that you thought of afterwards or once you got the slides, and then we can connect that way. So if there's no more questions, you all are free to return to your work. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you have a great day.